Hey everyone, Phreak here. Patch 10.6 is coming to League of Legends, and so as usual, I'm going to record a patch rundown for it. Apologies for how late last week's rundown was. I had a lot of weird issues with YouTube where it just wasn't processing the video. Eventually we got there later than wanted, but it was still uploaded a lot, so thanks everyone. This one's going to be more or less on time, and because with coronavirus and all that, I'm recording it closer to the time it actually comes out. The patch notes. So hooray, it's a little bit more timely for the North American audience. For Europe, you're probably already asleep, but see you in the morning. What an intro. Alright, so there's buffs, there's nerfs, there's new stuff. Sweet. Autofill balance in ranked. Now be less likely to create games where teams do not have the same number of auto-filled players. Cool. That's good. I like that. I have noticed things, and I've seen people mention this as well, where I will queue for fill, and someone else on my team will be auto-filled, and, like, someone's main role is one that I took. And it's like, but you can just have that, and I can be... Okay, whatever. So, you know, it's still not perfect, and that's too bad. I have still generally had fun with my ranked games. Whatever, but, I mean, this is a good change, right? I mean, you clearly are going to be worse at the game when you're not your main role. I know Riot tried the positional matchmaking thing and people didn't feel like they progressed fast enough, so that unfortunately wasn't usable. I still thought it was cool. Unfortunately, people didn't like it. Unlucky. Here's where we are, all the same. All right, so a couple of buffs, couple of nerfs. Let's get into it. Anivia R simply the iced duration, which is the duration for which your E does double damage, lasts the proper 3 seconds after leaving Glacial Storm. Very minor buff. You won't really notice this as a win rate change at all, but that's just a good thing. Great. Aphelios getting some more small nerfs. This came sooner than I expected, actually. I expected like maybe a patch off for the champion, but they're back at it again with the Aphelios nerfs, which is, I think, totally reasonable. So the innate heal on the Scythe pistol is down by a flat 5%. The bonus damage to minions is down at level 1 and at level 9, according to the League Wiki. I'm not certain that's true, but it probably is. And then the Chakram damage is down a little bit if you have multiple passive Chakrams stacked up. So here's the numbers. For what it's worth, I included Doran's Blade in this calculation because it's, I think, more appropriate to how the game actually functions with its champion. So basically, 8 becomes 11% and 3 becomes 6% because he is actually always going to have Doran's Blade. But here is the basically life on hit as a result. I'm not cutting Legend Bloodline. That's way more awkward to try to put together. But yeah, still a pretty substantial cut in his lifesteal. This is going to be felt. I want to reiterate that Aphelios has incredibly low base stats, very low health, exceptionally low MR, and fairly low armor. Having low resists... Well, basically, I would say that resists in general amplify your lifesteal. So if this is a champion who had, for some reason, 100 armor and 100 MR, his actual lifesteal numbers would be twice what these are, right? Because every point of damage requires 2 points of damage to actually cut his health down, but lifesteal goes in at full effect, if that makes sense. Hopefully it does. Sorry if it doesn't. With Aphelios having very low specifically MR. His armor is fine. His MR is quite low. He actually has less lifesteal in actual practice than other champions. Like, Draven gets more actual health per point of lifesteal than Aphelios does. And so even though his lifesteal numbers are still higher than other champions, 1/5 of the time, keep in mind, right, it's only 1/5 the time this lifesteal even comes through, that's still also a little bit lower because of his low base stats. So a little bit of stuff there. This is a very easy substitution. And then as far as Chakram damage, I had that math come down as well. This is counting the full auto attack damage, the 1x at the top, and then this coming up over the top of it. 24 is not 95% of 30, but 124 is 95% of 130. So there you go. It is a 4-ish% damage cut to Chakram. It is a 25, 20, 40, whatever. Keep in mind, he starts with Scythe Pistol at level 1, so you actually feel this right away. Yeah, this is going to be felt. It's going to lose another 1.5% win rate. I think 1.5 is reasonable because it's early laning, especially getting hit. Yeah, like I said, I think Aphelios is still a top performer, or at least he was coming into this patch. Getting to a point where people can start replacing him. I didn't think we really got there yet, but this is maybe just enough of a love tap. Like this is like meaningfully useful. This is going to be felt, especially the wave clear like is going to be felt. This is adding up, and I think he's going to get to a spot where it's reasonable. I saw people making fun of this Darius nerf on the internet. The bonus physical damage going down by 0.1 total attack damage, and the mana cost going up by 10. I think it's actually a pretty reasonable nerf. This is a solid, 5% damage cut on a melee ability he uses a lot. Keep in mind that in actual practice, a lot of the time, he's going to have more attack damage than this from runes. If he ever stacks 5 stacks on his passive, that's a big surge of AD, which is going to be felt even further here. I think this nerf is reasonable. It's not huge. He's still very good. He's going to be well above 50%. The 10 mana cost is going to be felt a little bit. I actually failed to do this, and I'm sorry about that. Apprehend, I believe, is, or at least should be, maxed second. And so you're going to feel this mana cost, get better once you're finally at rank 4 of the ability, which is level 12, even if you do max second. But honestly, mana cost constraints matter, right? If you can outplay Darius or kite him or lifesteal backup or whatever, Darius can go His only mana item is Trinity Force, and not even that's built literally every time, but almost every time. This will be felt. This does matter. People clown on mana costs, but mana costs are a pretty big deal. And mana costs tend to hit solo queue more than pro play. This champion is a solo queue problem more than a pro play problem. Tends to hit lower elos more than high elos. This is, I think, a well-intentioned nerf. It is good to nerf him. I think mana cost nerfs are good. I think this will be felt. Still above 50%, still going to be strong, still worth playing, way less abusive. Draven gets 10% more move speed, though decaying on the W. Cool change, nice to see it. I know they're trying to say, hey, let's try to capitalize higher skill levels of play, right? Draven is their high win rate champion, right? He is very good. I remember talking about Draven a while back in a previous patch when he got, I think, more buffs. Still very, very, very strong champion, very, very effective. Draven is exceptionally powerful. He is somewhat hard to play. It does take some learning to kind of get used to his play style, but a very, very good champion overall. Next up is Garen, who's losing 0.5 MR per level. And the crit damage on E is going down. So here is Garen MR before and after a fully stacked passive. Now, obviously, a fully stacked W passive at level 1 is not realistic, but it's just here for posterity's sake. So just as a function of base stats, the 9-ish MR that he loses, technically 8.5 at level 18, is 6% or 5%-ish less magic durability. Obviously, it takes a while to kick in, but it is there eventually. Worth noting, actually, that unless I've done the math wrong, and I don't believe I have, that the flat 30 MR he gets from the W passive, and then the 10% bonus MR that comes on afterwards gives you these numbers, right? It's still a down, about 4.5 MR to eventually, about 10 MR in the end game. The actual numbers of like percentage durability aren't that far off. So even though he already has free MR in the kit, thus making a flat MR cut not as important, it's still actually felt here. Now, yes, he still has the highest base MR in the game at level 18. That's still true. He is still innately tanky as a champion. Welcome to playing Garen. It's been true for almost his entire life as a champion. I think maybe literally his entire life as a champion. There was maybe maybe like a year where it wasn't the case. But honestly, this is still felt a fair bit. So you will notice this somewhat. 5% less magic durability in the end game. Okay, cool. And then the crit build does less damage on judgment. Didn't bother with the math here. But it's a bit less, right? Next up, Onslaught of Shadows has an up to extra half second of fear on max range ultimates. Mid-range cast will get a quarter second, so you'll feel a little bit of this even if you're not doing full, 1200 range charges. But cool to see Hecarim kind of getting better on the tank vector. I think that is a good place to buff Hecarim. I think his dueling is generally fine. His scaling is generally fine. But cool to see this as a champion who, like, if he's good, is more rewarded for like the cool engage stuff. I think the R is the coolest part of the kit. So it's nice to see that amped up. And I don't, this is still not even necessarily like, this is still arguably a bad Malphite ultimate. It's up for debate, but honestly, I like this change. Kayn getting some better orb speed because he actually got nerfed last patch. Good stuff. Kindred, they are getting some extra attack damage growth. Very, very, very tiny amount. I don't bother mathing numbers like this. I will math this out. I will math out the health restore on the W passive going up, and then a flat 50 to 100 health on the R. We don't have a data table for, but that's pretty easy to see kind of plainly. So here's the Kindred attack damage growth. A solid +5 at the end of the game, or probably 4, more like 4 with rounding. But, hey, a solid 4% more damage at the end of the game. Not horrible. It's pretty minor. It's it's a pretty soft rounding up kind of thing. Like, this could have gone to like 2.8 or something, and I think still would have been okay. But I don't mind rounding to the nearest 10th. I'm pretty happy with that. Thank you very much. So again, a little bit more attack damage. Cool, great. I haven't really dived in too heavily to a project I've been doing about trying to solve AD carry itemization. This is like the one step after looking at Relonomicon and Leandries. There's AD carry itemization. When do you buy attack damage? When do you buy attack speed? Kindred is in a weird middle ground where they have attack damage scaling that they care about and attack speed scaling they care about. Either way, more raw AD is kind of nice. If you do end up doing like Blood Razor builds, you're going to feel this more. If you're doing Warrior builds, you're going to feel this a little bit less. As far as the W healing, much higher at level 1, actually equal level 18. Yeah, basically just they amped it by 17 and then reduced this per level scaling by 1. Here's how much healing you get back from the W pass when it comes in. That'll be felt as well, obviously. So cool. The Kindred buffs, healthier early jungle and a bit more later team fight damage. Generally speaking, pretty happy with that. I like farming junglers. I like marksman junglers. On average, by the way, marksmen tend to reach about 110 attack damage at level 18, not counting weird edge cases like Jhin and Senna, who don't belong as like a generic average. But 110 is a pretty much median attack damage value, and that's where Kindred's landing up. So good job, Kindred. Morgana getting 5 more move speed, which puts her 10 faster than like base. 325 is like the generic slow champion, not counting edge cases like Janna. And then Black Shield, 20 more points at rank 1, equaling out by the end. This is going to be felt a lot. This is an ability you max second in a lot of cases. You max second in support. You don't max it. So what's interesting is like you max it second in support, and I'm pretty sure you max it last for mid Morgana because she wants damage output. And so in general, I'm pretty sure support Morgana reaches level 13 before mid Morgana hits 18. That is not necessarily true. I guess it's reasonably close to be fair, but in solo queue, I think that's more likely. Now, I will say that support Morgana probably does use Black Shield more than mid Morgana. That's probably true. But even then, if you're playing Morgana like into LeBlanc, you're trying to block spell damage, and the 20 shielding matters there as well. So I'm not certain that this change truly helps, at least the Black Shield change, truly helps support Morg more than mid-Morg. The move speed, I would argue, is also a bit equal there as well. Mid-Morg definitely does like to roam. Obviously, support Morg wants to roam more, so that probably is more of a support buff. But this is going to rise. This is a rising tide that's going to kind of buoy all ships. In this case, I don't think this is quite as support focused as maybe expected. Rise gets some more mana regen growth and also an extra 5 points of damage per W rank up. Now you max W last, but they're trying to say, hey, okay, Rise can stay in pro play, and right now he is at a healthy spot in pro play. But maybe they can help a little bit more solo queue stuff. And Rise is getting closer and closer and closer. Mana regen growth tends to be good. Again, mana management in general, right, tends to be easier for better players than worse players. This tends to be a solo queue and a lower elo buff. And then, look, if you're bad and you're maxing W second, cool, it's a buff for you. Again, don't max W second. But even if you do get to level 18, okay, actually, sorry, it's 10 more damage rank up. It's 40 more damage on the W, which is pretty cool as well. So here's the mana regen before and after. Actually pretty solid. Gets up to 5 mana per second. A solid 16% more mana regen in the end game. That's pretty good. That's going to be felt. Good job, Rise. Next up, Senna is getting less attack damage per soul, and she can't re-percent health damage people quite as often in the early landing phase especially. So here is Senna's attack damage based on soul count before and after. Now, certainly 80 souls is like an extreme mark, and it's probably way too high for most realistic cases. Well, I take that back. 80 souls is like reasonable for kind of endgame-ish. if you're doing a really good job of stacking up souls, 80 is somewhat reasonable. You're getting 4 range upgrades. Yeah, that's about endgame-ish. Obviously, it can keep going on forever theoretically. But here's the data table, right? Here's the damage difference. 50 souls for 100 AD is now only 88. Math. Congratulations, we got there. Powerful endgame with 80 souls, 130 becomes 110. Cool. All right, here you go. Slightly weaker landing phase, if you were able to hit the same target multiple times, is make her weaker in an all-in, by the way. It makes you really want to get her to level 11. This does have the effect, by the way, of arguably buffing, like, I'm buying a support item and I'm not farming, but I'm really the AD carry Senna, because she absorbs XP a lot and absorbs souls a lot, and she's really, really trying to acquire farm. Whereas, like, the Tahm Kench who's farming with the Doran's Ring, like, yeah, he's not warding, but you're not deferring the waves to Tahm Kench. You're saying, hey, we need someone to grab bot lane. I guess Tahm Kench is third in the pecking order. So, like, whereas Senna is, like, really prioritizing being around the lanes. Like, yes, she's warding and whatnot, but she's really prioritizing being around the lanes so that she can acquire souls. Like, the playstyle's a bit different. This helps the, like, in my mind, I'm an AD carry, but I have a Sight Stone. Because it has the level scaling on it. Shaco Clone does a bit less damage. I didn't math this one either. Soraka Star Call heal on herself and on her teammate if she W's them with the Q on her is another 10 points of health every time. 5% remove speed on the Q as well. I didn't look at Soraka's win rate. I assume it's a little bit low, which is why they're buffing her. In general, enchanters tend to get to live above 50%. I'm assuming that's what this is putting Soraka at, close to like 52 or something. I'm not sure exactly where she sits in support. I know I could look it up, but probably a fine change. Twisted Fate getting a change kind of out of nowhere. Haven't seen him in a long time, of course. But a 0.4 ability power ratio increase on the blue card and a 0.1 ability power ratio increase on the red card. I don't think we ever really get to the point where TF really wants to lock non-gold cards. I think red card is the only maybe realistic, reasonable one because AoE damage is good. TF is a champion that uniquely actually likes building raw ability power because wave clear is such a valuable part of the skill set, as is turret destruction. So, above things like Liandry's and even Oblivion Orb to a certain degree, although Oblivion Orb kind of fits the playstyle of Twisted Fate, of like assassination in team fights sometimes with the ultimate and ganks and whatnot. AP ratios are good. This is a guy who still likes to build Roa sometimes, every once in a while. Death Cap fits in the build really cleanly. Of course, split pushing TF is a really big deal because blue card hits turrets. That's a really big gain. So split push TF, which is ability power TF. Like, yes, you could magic pen the turrets, don't get me wrong, but like, Zonius doesn't affect them in any meaningful way, but Roa and Death Cap and Lichbane sure do. This is a big split push power buff if you're bad at locking cards, because I think you still want always gold cards in a team fight. Slightly stronger here as well, to the tune of like 12 damage in a mid-game team fight, and in some cases, hey, 35, pretty good. So cool change, pretty cool change. Urgot getting a slightly longer slow on the Q and a slightly longer stun on the E. So Urgot has been stealth nerfed a few times with changes that, melee champions get X, ranged champions get Y. Urgot is technically ranged. I mean, he's definitely ranged, but he tends to build melee champions items. I think raw power buffs to Urgot makes sense. Sorry that, you're in this weird spot where, unfortunately, you sit in a weird situation where every time there's like systems level items changes, you tend to be off on the wayside. It's unlucky. I know it sucks. Sorry, Urgot mains. But good to see compensation buffs. I'm assuming he was in a slightly weak spot, so cool to see that. Veigar gets some small buffs. He gets more attack damage. I'm not going to bother mathing 0.45 armor, but he gets 10 damage on Q and some attack damage scaling. Here is the, I forgot to actually put in the Q damage. My bad, it's a flat 10. But here's the attack damage before and after. It's 3% higher. Right, getting to about 100, I think, is reasonable for most non-marksman, non-auto attack champions. Getting to about 100, I think, is reasonable. Cool place to land. It's really minor. This can help him set up for Q last hits. It can help him last hit when Q's on cooldown. Right? It's to me, generally speaking, is more of a landing phase buff. He's autoing more in the early game than in the late game. So even though it's 3% buff at both kind of points in time, in the real world, it's an early game buff and not a late game buff because who cares about 3 attack damage late game? 10 flat damage in the Q. Sure, great. Technically moves the needle a little bit in terms of him like wanting to build Magic Pen a bit more than Magic Pen a bit more than Death Cap, but Death Cap is still a really like proper item to build here. Easier to stack your Q, of course, as well, when you can last hit minis a little bit more easily. You can a bit more readily find that break point where you one-shot cast your minions. So, yeah, this is going to be felt. This is probably a good, like, 1.5% on Veigar. I'm confident that Veigar is already very, very, very strong. I came into the season saying I want to be a fill main and I want to constrict my champion pool to try to play... like one of the problems of playing Phil is my champ pool is I don't have enough depth on any champions, so I'm bad at all the champions. Okay, I'm gonna focus in on like 4 champs per role so that I can like do damage, like physical versus magic damage, tanks versus non-tanks, whatnot. And Veigar is one of the champions that had such a high win rate that I was like, I'm going to be a Veigar main for half of my time in mid lane this year. And Veigar has now gotten even stronger since then. Like, this champion, I think, is super good. I don't think he needs buffs. I know we're not seeing him in pro much. We've seen, like, a couple of games. But I think Veigar is going to be an absolute terror next patch. And honestly, I don't hate these. This is fine. Whatever. It helps, like, novice Veigar players a bit. But, like, I don't know. This to me just ends up being too much. And Veigar is going to be... I don't know if he's going to be popular enough to be pick ban in solo queue or pro. But, like, maybe. Next up, big changes, a WUKONG gameplay update / remaster, whatever you want to call it. All right, less base health, less base MR, but more mana. Okay, well, here is his health before and after. It is 7 to 2% less health. The scaling didn't go anywhere, so it's simply just 38 health off. 37.8, but, whatever. It's actually interesting to see that this is a melee champ with under 2k health. That tends to be quite low. WUKONG is pretty squishy. This makes it pretty squishy. His MR, here's the data table. Again, it's 4 less MR. Multiplied with the health, he is 9% less durable against magic. I know what he's trying to do here was to try to find a way to make WUKONG less good in mid and more of a top laner. His armor still fairly high. His health scaling is okay, but with his passive no longer giving him... all that, I guess it was armor only, to be fair. Oh, no, okay. Oh, I'm hard trolling. Sorry, yeah. The passive MR is completely gone, right? So the passive MR is gone. The base MR is down. They are really trying to make magic damage good against WUKONG, right? And he's going to sit at 49 MR at level 18, which is reasonably low. Now, I actually managed to misread this, and I didn't realize this change happened. But 4, 6, 8 per nearby champion. It's now 5 to 11, somewhat linear per nearby champion. So the armor is, I would say, generally higher. And if I had been smart enough to actually throw in this math, and I could have done it, and that's my bad, this probably comes very close to making up for this change. So in general, this will probably be very, very, very close to making up for this change. I'm going to guess it's about equal. When you're considering that this is about a 1 to 2% durability increase, it's going to make up for it at 18. It's not going to make up for it at level 1. It's going to equalize out by the end, though. When you look at what a 4 MR cut is, and that's 4% magic durability, getting 3 more armor per nearby champion is going to make up for this. So WUKONG's late game team fighting is going to have, up to 55 bonus armor on top of his like 90-ish, 100-ish armor. That's very, very, very high. It might mean that WUKONG doesn't even need to itemize armor very much against physical damage teams. It also means WUKONG gets to be a counterpick to physical heavy teams. These are numbers that are good enough to matter. Having 50 more armor than other champions, which is about where it's going to end up, is going to be noticeable. Now, I want to point out that his health regen has been added. He gets 0.5% max health regen per 5 seconds, and he gets to make that a 500% bonus of that as well. I believe I did the math right on this. We're going to hope we did this right. Oh, yeah, here's the mana real quick, by the way. 13 to 17% more mana. It's good to about 1k. Cool, great, good job. In general, I think scaling up to 1,000 is correct. I would like to see the scaling be 40 instead of 45, just because it would be like 980 and close to 1,000, but it's like the most minor thing in the world, so who cares? So here's WUKONG's health regen. This is just his base health per minute, counting his max HP. If he buys no health at all, he has about 50% more health regen. Right, so WUKONG in the very, very early inning phase still gets about 30 more health per minute, and he has, about 30 less base health. So after 1 minute in the laning phase, he is going to regen the missing health that he had. So if you're worried about his laning not being good enough, it's fine. His team fighting, again, we're only at like 2% less health in the end game. And again, less armor is going to be felt. Again, he's going to be weaker against mages, but the health regen makes up for the lost health in the early game. In the end game, we'll see. Because keep in mind, he still gets to keep the armor on this passive, if not the MR, but he gets to increase these bonuses. I just realized, by the way, that I'm pretty sure the armor bonuses are also increased, not just the health regen, which means that this is not just 55 bonus armor, it is 200 bonus armor. I think I have that right, because it says bonuses. I know there are people who watch PvE and know the answer definitively. I am pretty sure this means he gets 6 times 11 is 66 bonus armor per champion, which is 330 bonus armor. That is a lot of armor. Now, he has to hit enemy champions 8 times to get that. That will take time, but wow. Even in its early laning phases, right? 5 becomes, what, 8? I mean, wow. That's just really good. But yeah, if we're looking at just health regen, if I did the math right, he is getting extra 12 health per second at level 18, compared to, 3.4 for, what it used to be. I'm pretty sure this math is correct. 0.5% max health times 6. Yeah, like 12 health per second is not garbage. That will be felt to a certain degree. It's not a ton, but it's almost Ocean Drake levels of health regen. And again, it scales up with max HP. This guy has reasonably low max health, so you can really amp this up by just getting another 1,000 health or so. Yeah, I mean, that can be done. It's 3% max health every 5 seconds with a fully stacked Man in the Mirror. Not horrible. All right, so now some ability reworks. Bonus damage on Crushing Blow changes from 10 to 130 plus total attack damage to 30 to 130 plus bonus attack damage. I want to point out the attack damage ratio is higher in all cases. Just for ease of operation, I assumed every ability was maxed first. I know it's not accurate, but if Q is maxed first, here is the W, or here is the damage before and after. First few ranks are stronger. His early laning is objectively better and has a higher AD ratio. At rank 3, if you're maxing it first, it does 6 less damage, but, with a, 0.3 higher AD ratio at that point in time, that doesn't take that much attack damage to get back there. I think it's 20 attack damage. That's not that hard to get. Maybe not in the super early game, but somewhat realistic. And as time goes on, because the old one had a total attack damage ratio, it scaled with champion level. You eventually have something like 55 less total damage, which means 550 bonus AD to make Q do more damage. That's not realistic. That's not going to happen. It's not going to be a stronger ability in the end game as far as individual hits are concerned. Not stronger in damage. However, the range goes up so we can more reliably hit someone from across the screen. That's going to be felt. That's going to be nice. You're going to feel that a little bit. So you take a little bit less damage, you get more reliability. Generally, we take those. Cast time goes faster as well. That's going to be felt. Wukong, by the way, gets half a second off the cooldown because the cooldown got nerfed whenever he deals damage. And it's whenever it deals damage to basic attacks or ability. It's not even on champion, so you can just simply whack minions and get your Qs back. So even though the base cooldown is weaker, the tune of a pretty reasonably effective 2-second difference at max rank. 4 attacks reduces this. That's realistic in most cases. You're getting 2 Qs off in a fight anyway. So yeah, it does slightly less damage, but it reaches more often. And honestly, the cooldown in practice is going to be shorter. At rank 1, it's objectively always shorter. W is a little bit new. The decoy no longer just disappears and deals damage. Instead, it mimics his attacks and ultimate, dealing half to about 2/3 of the damage. You probably max this last, don't get me wrong. The cooldown rank up's not very good. The damage, there's no cost rank up, but the cooldown rank up and the damage rank up is not that good. But it'll attack things Wukong's attacked. It will get extra empowered Qs, it'll get extra attack speed with E. It will spin and knock up enemies with the R. And again, it deals, half-ish the damage, that's real good. That's really, really, really good. You now get several ultimates out, right? Like, that is just very strong. That is really, really effective. This is going to be a hugely powerful ability. This is going to take some getting used to. It'll take some learning to use it appropriately, but this sounds really good. Incredibly strong ability. It's not worth doing math to compare this stuff. It's just a very good ability. And then we have Nimbus Strike. Damage has been increased by 15 to 35. The attack damage ratio is gone, by the way. It's an ability power ratio now. So, do point out that I look at this Q damage or this E damage, and yes, it's up 15 to 25. But, if we do like, hey, what's 15 divided by 0.8? It takes 19 AD. What's 35 divided by 0.8? 44. In all realistic cases, old Wukong E dealt more damage, generally speaking. The base value is higher. And keep in mind again, right? Level 1 of the ability does more damage. You can't make up the damage yet. We looked at the Q damage. Q damage is better. We looked it up already. Like, yes, the base health is down, but the health regen is up. Wukong's early laning is objectively stronger. Like, that is not up for debate in any way at all. Wukong's first few levels are objectively stronger unless he's against magic damage. If he's not against magic damage, he's objectively a stronger laner. For the first, I will say, for now, 6 levels. And then as you rank up the Q, okay, the old Q is better. As you get attack damage, the old E was better. That starts to wear on you, sure. But the attack speed is up by 10%, and the buff duration is up by 1 second as well, which means your attack speed, and by the way, Wukong has essentially 8% free attack speed at level 1. So here is like the actual math on how much attack speed he has before and after, and he has 7 to 5% more attacks. And keep in mind, right, that this buff lasts 20% longer. So it's, this was sort of 120% attack speed. This is sort of 200% attack speed. This was sort of 200% attack speed. This is sort of 300% attack speed. And, if you want to multiply it out the duration, right? So this essentially gives you an extra full attack when all is said and done. One full extra attack is good. Getting a full extra attack is very, very strong. That is 100-something damage. And if you are able to use this makes up for the E damage difference. It makes up for the Q damage difference. And it gives your next Q back sooner, which we already know is more reliable. So even if just those things were happening, just the Q and E and, these reshapes, it would at least be close. I'm not saying it's necessarily always stronger, because it's not always stronger. In a burst situation, it is definitely weaker. But if you are able to keep attacking, it is stronger. It makes up for it eventually. Maybe the QE combo and the overall teamfight pattern still doesn't quite make up for it, because you do want it to be bursty. It's still close, though. The damage differences are not that big. Cooldown is weaker in the early game, but the cost is a bit cheaper, to the tune of 15. Also, you are not put directly on top of your target. You are a little bit off, which gives you maybe some room to kite back if you needed to. Honestly, I just think the visuals are better that way, just in general. I'm happy about that. But here's the cooldown table. Again, you're not going to max both E and Q first, obviously. I'm not certain which one gets maxed first in the real world, now that we're going to be in this one. But the cost difference, of course, pretty much felt as well. And keep in mind, again, Wukong got a lot more mana, to the tune of like 20-ish%. His costs got a bit cheaper here as well. So, it gets to cast more abilities. They do a little bit less damage, but his overall, well, not in the early game. Early game, they do objectively more damage. In the late game, they do a bit less damage. Seems overall pretty doable as a character. And then the big change is Cyclone. He can now cast it twice. So he has 2 different 2-second long spins, meaning he can ult, see someone flashes away, E to them, land Q, ult again, and keep chasing. That's going to be felt. That's going to be nice. Want to point out that both of these ults can knock up. So he has a total of 1.5 seconds instead of a total of 1 second worth of knock up. Worth pointing out that if the guy gets one shot, he has less total CC. Don't get me wrong. Now, as far as the damage is concerned, the total attack damage ratio is the same. So how about the base DPS? 20 to 200 at level 6 to 16, or 4 to 8% maximum health. Pop quiz, which one do you think is higher? 20 to 200, or 4 to 8% max health. You've got numbers in your head. Let's see if you're right. Rank 1 of the ability, definitely stronger. It is equal when the target has 500 health. If your level 6 Wukong has 500 health, something is wrong in this game. So definitively more damage, and the AD ratio is the exact same, 1.1 total attack damage per tick. That's going to be there no matter what. Easy peasy. So there's actually already a flat base damage from his total AD, and it's like, 70 to 150 already, right? Which is, by the way, not even that far off from what this was in the first place. So, a lot of the heavy lifting comes from the base AD in this case, and then you get to rank 2 of the ultimate right in here, and you're looking at pretty similar numbers. It's close-ish. I'm using Wukong, by the way, as a sample health target. Wukong is slightly squishy for a melee, but it still only takes 1,833 health for your target's HP to be appropriate. Yeah, in the early game, mid Lissandra doesn't have 1,800 health just yet when she goes Luden's Echo. If she goes Proto Belt, maybe she does, right? But she's Luden's Echo, maybe not there. But the Maokai probably does with his first item Sunfire Cape. And then at the very end of the game, your last 3 ranks, 2,500 health. Most typical mages, most typical marksmen, any enchanter support, any non-tank jungler. Yeah, they're going to take less damage here. He is going to be less good as an assassin, right? We're going to talk about his end game damage values are objectively weaker on Q and E. His end game ultimate damage values are objectively weaker against squishies. That is definitively true. He does less total damage in the end game. But he does more against tanks, right? If he can play a longer fight, if he can be a bit more of a bruiser, where he's using things like Black Cleaver and Death's Dance and Titanic Hydra, and he's going around like this, and he's able to use the, longer form attack speed buff on the E, get the cooldown refresh on the Q, be tricky with his W, and that's the big thing that we're not really keeping track of here. That the damage numbers on paper are lower in, I would say, most cases endgame, but this exists. And if this hits anything at all, it makes up for all of it. All of it. And this is the hardest thing to track. I don't know how reliable his W is going to be, but if it's reliable at all, his damage is not weaker. It's going to be a wild ride. Next up, Xerath. It's a bit more damage on the I of the W and a bit more damage on the R. Here is the W damage. Here is the R damage. 90 to 270 becomes a clean 1 to 300. Great. The R damage up a very little bit. The ratio up 5%. Very light touches. Xerath, I think, is a bit over 50%. I think he's fine. Whatever. I don't mind too heavily if Xerath is around. Fine enough champion. I enjoy playing him, so whatever. Support Xerath learns W. I mean, everyone learns W at 1. To be fair, it's Xerath. You learn W because it's the reliable ability. Yeah, I mean, he feels a little bit, right? It's felt to some degree. Good stuff. Brand and Morgana do better against monsters, and Shen and Teemo blinds them, and Yorick gets Graves, and Zyra. Again, they're adding some more champions that the logic seems to be like, if you get autofilled in the jungle, you can play a champion you know how to play. I think as long as the champions get to 48% win rate, that's good enough. And it's like, well, I have 100 games in Morgana and 2 games on Lee Sin. Lee Sin is objectively a stronger jungler, but my 3rd game on Lee Sin is weaker than my 101st game on Morgana. I'll go more jungle. As long as these champions land here, I'm happy. I think that's a good place to be. I don't think these need to crest 50%. I think they should be above 45 so that you're not considered trolling. And I think a good place to land is 48, 49. I actually would not want them to crowd out conventional junglers. I actually think that would be somewhat of a failing, and I think jungler players would be very unhappy if these started siphoning win rate off of good junglers, because only half of champions can be above average, and if Morgana's above average champion to the detriment of Graves, I feel like that's a failing, because Morgana can only be played mid and support, right? I think that would just be wrong. More heavy funnel punishing. Now it's also half XP from lane minions, so now you can't really power farm. If you're playing funnel, it's really only a solo queue strat. Good to see, they're going to keep going after this one. I'm glad to see it continue. Good stuff. Top lane follow-up, Death's Dance and Teleport. So Death's Dance now builds with armor and MR in it. And the post-damage mitigation, this is a typo, I'm pretty sure. It is only 20% mitigation into bleed for ranged. It remains 30 for melee. Here's a quick look at the numbers here, by the way. So it lost 30 AD, which is like 1,000-ish gold. Let's, I guess, zoom out slightly so that we can get all the numbers on the screen. Right, it's about the same gold efficiency. You are technically getting like 80, 90 more gold worth of stats overall. But yeah, I mean, they basically compensated almost exactly the right amount of armor and MR for attack damage. Now, I want to point out, by the way, though, that this very quickly becomes, by the way, an optimal item for AD carries. So I want to point something out, which is like, let me talk about like where this item is positioned, because there's essentially math to consider here, which is if you're a high level champion, health, armor, and MR are properly balanced cost-wise against one another. What that means is if you spend 1,000 gold on health, you get, let's say, 25% tankier. We're making up numbers, but let's say 1,000 gold of health is 25% more durability for most champions. That tends to be true, by the way. Okay, great. Good job. Congratulations. If you were to spend 1,000 gold on armor, you would get 50% more durable against physical damage, which makes sense. It only works against half the damage types, and true damage, of course, exists as well, don't get me wrong. And the same is true for MR. Armor and MR cost about the same per stat point. It's close enough that it's fine. We can kind of brush it aside. In the early game, the opposite is true. In the early game, health is by far the most efficient. In all cases, no questions asked. Death's Dance is a fairly late purchased item. It is bought at a time where armor and MR are finally gold efficient to buy over raw health. The item also gives lifesteal, which is, essentially health, right? You're just receiving pure HP back. That health multiplies armor and MR. So a lifesteal item having resists on it is incredibly efficient. This makes Ma very good. This makes Mercurial Scimitar fairly good, and it makes new Death's Dance fairly good. Now, the thing I want to point out is AD carries tend to not have a lot of ways to find armor and MR. Like, occasionally you'll see like a Ninja Tabby or a Merc Treads, but probably not. You might see Scimitar, you might see Hex Drinker, but now you have a choice between getting 1,100 gold worth of armor and MR, or a Bloodthirster Shield, which is, if I remember my numbers correctly, it's like 600 health around there. Now, 1,000 gold worth of health, by the way, is about 400 HP. A bit less than that, but it's close. That's about what it costs. So 30 armor, 30 MR is about 400 health worth of defensive stats. And this is on all the time, compared to Bloodthirster, where you do have to lifesteal up to it. Now, BT has more lifesteal on it, but this item has CDR. It also has the damage store on it, right? Because before, keep in mind, I'm putting numbers out here so you can kind of understand how these items are positioned against one another. Like, yes, Bloodthirster has more damage, but Death's Dance at this point maybe just has more durability now. Because before it was, well, it's 80 damage versus 80 damage, and okay, the lifesteal's a bit weaker, but it works on spells, and then okay, CDR is kind of nice and everything, but, will a 30% damage store be better than a BT shield? I don't know. Well, will 30 armor, 30 MR, and a 20% damage store be better than a BT shield? Okay, now maybe, right? And so there really was a concern, I think legitimately so, that Death's Dance is going to get poached by marksmen. And that's a totally reasonable thing to be concerned about. Because how else are marksmen getting efficient armor and MR? I can easily see, just because I know the way pros tend to work, they tend to work on feel, and they see things and say, this makes sense to me. This, on paper, looks like the kind of item a generic pro marksman player is going to buy 5th or 6th item. that they're going to figure out if they need Lord Dominic's or not. They're going to figure out if they need Mortal Reminder or not. They'll be wrong half the time. And they'll go, I want my defensive item. And they're just going to go Death Stance. Because they're going to be sitting at, 38.5 MR and been like, I really sure would like to have to say 70 and just buy a Death Stance. And that's the math. Now, again, I want to point out that in a generic AD carry case, like if you have bought Maw of Malmortius and you're worried about dying to a mage, BT is probably better because the raw health shield probably beats the extra 30 MR on this item. You need to, of course, want the 30 armor as well. But yeah, we can realistically see a world where this is an item bot. And again, I want to reiterate one more time, armor and MR are more efficient than health, at least in burst scenarios, only in a high level situation. If we're seeing Death Stance second because they're like, I want to rush my ages, that is objectively wrong. You want this item third-ish. There's math for you. There you go. The math gets more complicated when you start talking about regen and healing mechanics and whatnot, and that statement gets walked back a bit in the real world, but there's only so much we can do. Next up, teleport has a change. It's got a scaling cooldown, and it gives movement speed when the teleport completes. All right, so this is assuming the teleport cooldown scales linearly. It is a weaker spell until level 7. What's interesting about this is like the buck gets passed here because your first teleport is off cooldown anyway. It's when does your second teleport come in that changes. So if you get forced out of lane and TP at level 3, that still happened. You still TP'd at level 3, and the ability is really no different. It's only different 6 minutes and 40 seconds down the line when you're level 7, and now you have a 40-second cooldown difference of forcing someone's teleport. So it's interesting, right? Because it basically means that your first TP is unchanged, your second TP is later, and then, like, depending on the math, your third TP is on time, right? Like 28 seconds. Well, you get that back around here. So if your third TP is level 9 or later, you've made it, right? As long as your second TP wasn't so delayed that you were screwed over. Obviously, the move speed difference is kind of nice. It makes TP flanks really nice. This actually helps you not need home guard boots, or sorry, the recall to get home guard buff for then teleport in. You don't need the home guard buff to get your flanks to go quite as well. Let's read the context sentence here. The teleport change should also shift some power as an excellent lane sustain tool to a more late game splitting and flanking tool. Yeah, and that is true, right? When you are a level 17 Fiora or whatever, and your teleport cooldown is massively shorter to the tune of over a minute and sometimes 2 minutes, that is really, really, really felt. A 2-minute shorter cooldown is a really big deal. Yes, level 18 is not that common, but even 1 minute off is felt by level 13. That is realistic for every top laner in every game of League of Legends. By level 13, you have a substantially different 1-minute cooldown. That is absolutely going to be felt, absolutely matters, definitely a big deal. Look out for that. I think that's definitely meaningful. It's hard to say it's a strict buff to teleport because, again, it is weaker for the second TP. From the third one onwards, you're basically fine. But yeah, I mean, it's going to be interesting. TPing into fights is going to be stronger. Okay. Recommended items, big sweep for a bunch of champions. Awesome, cool stuff. Glad to see it. ARAM balance changes. Kai'Sa, a little bit too strong. Obviously, last patch had a bunch of Kai'Sa APW buffs. Yeah, it's pretty bonkers. So, okay, less damage dealt. Good job. Client looks a bit different. Bunch of bug fixes. Great. Apparently, Rek'Sai got CC immunity after using R on clones for 3 seconds. Whoops. New skins. Looks cool. Alrighty. Whew, that is bright. Alright, everyone. Welcome to the patch 10.6 Too Long Didn't Watch rundown. We've got autofill balancing. They're going to try to balance the number of autofill players in each team. Good stuff. Anivia now has a proper 3 seconds she can wait before, basically, this is a buff. If they walk out of Glacial Storm, she has 1 extra second to get double damage on E. Cool. Aphelios is a bit less lifesteal, a bit less wave clear, and a bit less chakram damage. Overall, this should put Aphelios finally in a spot where he's not the best marksman anymore. I think we're finally there for real this time. Still good, but I think he's no longer number one. I think he's actually not number one anymore. Mana cost nerfs to Darius and some decent damage off the W. Still going to be overpowered, or at least he's going to be on the strong side of balanced. I mean, that can be technically overpowered if you want it to be. Going to be a very strong champion still. Draven gets some extra move speed on the W. Also, very strong champion. Garen gets 0.5 less MR per level and less crit damage on the E. He's going to feel the magic durability, even though he gets free stats with the W. He's still going to feel it. Hecarim gets a long range R's to fear for longer. Cool. Kayn transforms sooner because last patch actually nerfed him. Good change. Kindred gets more attack damage. This ends up being about 4 to 5 AD at level 18. And quite a bit of extra healing off the W. This is a 50% bump at level 1. Equals out at level 18. But will be felt in the early game. Will be felt in the late game. And this is just generally a nice thing to see. More healing on the R. Maybe your teams can get away afterwards. Pretty substantial power gain. I think Kindred's not in that bad of a spot. So Kindred should be in a pretty good spot after the patch. Morgana gets 5 move speed and 20 to 0 extra shielding on the E. That'll be felt a lot. Morgana should be in a very good spot. Definitely worth playing. Ryze gets 0.2 mana regen growth and 0 to 40 more damage on the W. You shouldn't consider this time to max W second. Don't do it. But it makes his later levels obviously quite a bit stronger. And you're really going to feel the late game mana regen there as well. This should be a pretty nominal, pretty solid win rate buff to Ryze. He shouldn't be taking over pro with changes like this, but will be in a better spot. Senna getting a pretty meaningful attack damage per soul cut on the passive. You'll feel this is going to be, to the tune of like 20 attack damage in late game. That's going to be felt. This is and she needed it, to be honest. Senna is overperforming in all roles. Does need the nerf. Great. And then a weaker harassing in lane as well, which will also cut soul generation because you don't get the weakened soul, hit yoink as often. Sheikah ult does less damage. Good choice. Sokka gets 10 more healing off the Q, as well as to her teammate, and 5% more move speed off the Q as well. Pretty solid buff. Good 1.5% win rate on Soraka. Good stuff. TF gets 0.4 higher AP ratio on blue card and a 0.1 higher AP ratio on red card. This is most notably good on split push TF. This actually makes him need Lich Bane less because blue card itself is going to do so much. It's going to carry so much of the weight. That's going to be impactful there. Split push TF is going to gain a lot here. Mid-game wave clear, or at least, last hitting with blue card is going to be helpful a little bit. I mean, he's going to have like 30-ish AP at level 1, so, 30 AP times 0.4 AP ratio is still a pretty solid 12 damage, so it even helps like blue card trading and blue card last hitting in some cases. Going to be felt a fair bit. Red card wave clear 0.1 AP ratio going to be felt a little bit as well. You might hit some breakpoints you weren't going to otherwise. Pretty solid buff to TF. I like seeing TF. I think he's a cool champion. Good to see. Quarter second on both of Urgot's crowd controls. Good job, Urgot. Veigar, I think, was already very strong and doesn't need the 3% more attack damage. This doesn't mean anything. The 10% damage on Q, a very big deal. It's going to help novice Veigars more than like the experienced Veigars, but I don't think Veigar needed the help. I think Veigar is OP, and at least with this change, is going to be OP. And we'll see if he's 100% pick ban in solo queue or pro, but this is going to be a pretty big deal. Big reshape on WUKONG. The TLDR on WUKONG is his early game is objectively stronger. However, his durability against magic damage is objectively weaker. But his damage is up, his regen is up, and his lane against physical damage champions is up. His lane against magic damage champions, weaker. That said, he has more mana. His early damage is up. His late game damage is down. His late game Q, E, and R are all going to deal less damage in the late game and more damage in the early game. That, however, can be compensated by the fact that Q's cooldown now scales with hitting things and has more reach end game, so it might deal less damage per hit, but you might get more hits. The E gives you more attack speed for longer at max rank, the same cooldown, for a cheaper cost. And he has more mana, keep in mind. And the W deals half to 2/3 of the damage of your abilities from the clone itself. When does that equal out the damage of the clone just doing the wah and disappearing? I don't know. That's hard to tell. This is not really mathable. My instinct is this will take some time to learn and will end up being very, very good. As far as his R damage is concerned, you get 2 different 2-second casts instead of 1 4-second cast. The damage is better in the early game, and then in the mid to late game, it is slightly weaker against squishies and slightly better against tanks, but the numbers are fairly close overall. I think max rank ult requires like 2,500 health to do more damage, but like when champs have 2,100, it's pretty close. The AD ratio is unchanged. Also, it like holds on to the E attack speed timer, which is cool. All right, solid like 11% more damage on the Eye of the W, which is nice. R does like 5% more damage. Okay, really minor buffs there to Xerath. Brand, Morg, Shen, Teemo, Yorick, and Zyra, and maybe jungle. We'll see if it happens. Funneling now also gives less XP if you're funneling. Death's Dance now has armor and MR and 30 less attack damage. It is also 20% mitigation into bleed for, I'm assuming this is a typo, ranged champions. Melee is unchanged. This is, in general, by the time you build Death's Dance, a buff to the item. You're probably building it third-ish. You already have a bunch of AD. You probably got some health and some lifesteal that makes armor and MR good. This item could be poached by Marksman. I am not sad about the 20% change for ranged champions. I think that's a correct choice based on the stat profile and sort of the timing of when the item will be bought. I think that is reasonable to do. Death's Dance, I would say, is generally speaking a stronger item for when it was bought already. This is going to look pretty good, I think. And finally, Teleport has a longer cooldown in the early game and a shorter cooldown in the end game, but also gives a bunch of movement speed when you finish casting it. We have the data table right here for the teleport timer. Want to point out that your first cooldown is already available, so your first TP is unchanged. You get sent back, you TP back to lane. It's no different. The only thing that's different is when does your second teleport come back from cooldown, and if your first TP is in the first 6 levels, which it tends to be, then it indeed is later on in the game, which means your third teleport maybe comes in an extra level later or something in that. Fourth and onwards, then it's fine again. Recommended item pass on a bunch of champions. Seems cool. Kai'Sa nerf for ARAM. Cool. Minor client update for some icons. Bunch of bug fixes. New skins. Sounds great. Thanks for watching, everyone. I'll see you next time.